I've got 5 children. They all have children. I have about 10 grandchildren, which, as you say, makes me a granddaddy of, yeah. And I have lived in both Zambia and Zimbabwe, and I was born in at what is called St. David's Mission in Chief Nyandoro's area in Mashonaland West East. But I grew up mostly in what is now called Bare. I went to school there, what is now called Chitsere. It was called the Government School West. It was the first government school built by the government of Southern Rhodesia. And it was simply called Government School West, which meant that they were going to build others north, east, and so on, which were built eventually, like Shingrai and Chirozo and so on. And I eventually went to school. I went to secondary school in Mpandeni. We opened the secondary school in Mpandeni in 1953. I think it was a gift of Federation. Federation was formed in 53. That's when we opened the secondary school there. I think it was some kind of gift, I think, anyway. I was a privilege to be there. And my teacher was a man called George Talusha. He was very good in English. And I got my inspiration to write in English from him, basically. And I also did a year's course in English, especially with a group called, a group of Church of Christ missionaries from the United States. And I owe them a lot. They were Mr. and Mrs. Charles Gruber. And I'll never forget them because they were elderly, they were not young people, but they knew so much, poetry, literature, and everything. And I was supported there. I was very much. There were three of us doing a course there. The other two were Fanny Tseta and Wilson Zaranyika. Fanny is late now, but they were both the children of sergeants in the BSAP. The three of us. It was a very concentrated course, and I think I benefited a lot from that. And in 1957, I was invited to join African newspapers. I didn't apply because I had published in there a short story called The Downfall of Sandy, which was a story about punishment, crime and punishment and so on. And I was called by the editors of the African Daily News and asked if I would join them. The editor-in-chief was Lawrence Bambe, and William Sir was editor of the African Weekly at the time. I think they all sort of contributed to my being there, and I was asked if I was interested. I said I was also absolutely interested. The man who taught me to be a reporter is a guy called Albert Lumuchena, the brother of the Chief Justice, Lumuchena. Albert Lumuchena was a mercurial character. He's an unforgettable character. He was the chief reporter of the African Daily News. And he was so good that at one time, if Wambe said to Shamana, do we have a lead story? And Shamana said, well, I'm not sure. They said, ask Lumuchena. And they used to call him Dooms. And they would say, yeah, we need a lead story. And Lumuchena said, okay, give me 5 minutes. And he'd sit down on his typewriter and bang away. It was an old Remington. Bang away, and in 50 minutes he's got them a lead story. I worked under him, and he taught me a lot. I think the beginning of being a reporter was easy because of Albert Lumuchena. When I quit because I was very impetuous. I didn't take any kind of leap from many people. Some people thought that I was a bit fast, but I just didn't like people telling me things which I didn't agree with, and so on. I mean, I had set tools, if you like, with some of the editors, especially in my writing and so on, you see, because I was basically a man who was steeped in creative writing, mostly. But here I was going to be a reporter, and of course, and I learnt from Lumuchena how to be a reporter. But there were occasions when I would ask questions which they would say, you don't ask a question like that. I learnt all that, of course. But eventually I I was acting editor of the African Parade, acting editor of Bala Nyasland, which was a weekly newspaper. Parade, as you know, was...
This was that one, Bala Nyasland was here in
Yes, yes.
Salisbury then.
African newspapers, you see, published, apart from the African Daily News, they published a thing called The Recorder, which was an educational weekly, The Harvester, which was an agricultural weekly, and the African Daily News, which was a daily paper, and the African Weekly, which had started, before the Daily News. And of course, they published the Bantu Mira in Bulawayo, which was the first newspaper that actually existed in Zimbabwe, in southern region then, for Africans, Bantu Mira. So there were these papers, and the people who were editing the Bala Nyasaland were basically from Nyasaland, there, from Lusaka, who came here. But with Bala Nyasaland, because I was there, and they saw my surname, that he must be from, he must know some of these things.
That's right.
I didn't refuse. I said, okay, I'll try it. You see, my father actually was from Nyasaland, although he came here like many other people to seek his fortune.
That's right.
He ended up with a fortune. Son is a fortune. Yeah. No, but it is. Saidi is there are so many of them there.
In Malawi.
Oh yeah. Oh,
in
absolutely.
Nyasaland,
Yeah, in Nyasaland.
in Malawi now.
Yeah. And when they saw, they said, well, we put a Saidi here, and he can do the Bala Nyasaland.
That's right.
And I said to them, look, I don't even speak Nyanja. I don't. The only way there is Mulibanji. My first job, my first assignment as a junior reporter was to cover the formation of the ANC in 1957 at MISA-Zimbabwe.
Yes.
William Saru, I think, was doing the real story.
MISA-Zimbabwe.
Yeah, MISA-Zimbabwe, which was then called Recreation Hall.
Uh-huh.
Before it became MISA-Zimbabwe.
Yes.
1957. I was there, and we saw all this, the election of Joshua Nkomo and George Nyandoro and so on and so forth. It was, unlike any other story that I've covered, because I felt it won, And for me, the curious thing was that I had known George Nyandoro and James Chikerema before that.
Yes.
Because one of the first assignments I was given was to check on the formation of the ANC. It was still in the formative stage, you see. So I went to Highfield, they were based there, with a man called Paul Mushonga, who had a shop at what is now called Machipisa.
Yes.
And they met there. And I was asked to come there, and I would go there. I think I went there for, about 3 or 4 times before they announced that they were going to form the ANC. So I knew the background.
Yes.
And I had become so attached to George Monroe and James Chikerema that, for a lifetime, they were like big brothers to me. And I was loyal to them in a way that was perhaps not good enough for a journalist, but they told me about why they were forming the ANC and why Africans of Southern Asia would rise up against. And our story, I think the Daily News story, was concentrated on that. In fact, there was a time when we couldn't differentiate between our jobs as journalists and our jobs as part of the struggle.
Yes.
And these people, the nationalists, also came to visit the Daily News offices. They came there so regularly that some of us believed that they actually worked at the Daily News or they had attachments. There was a time when Tranos Makombe, I think you remember his name, yes. Tranos Makombe, who was one-time governor in the Midlands province. Yeah, and then he died.
To become the ambassador.
Yes, that's right.
That's right.
Tranos used to come there almost every day. So that at his death, when he died, I asked him, I said, was Tranos one of us? Did he work for the Daily News? He said, no. I said, what do you mean he was there all the time? He said, no, he wasn't there all the time. He used to contribute something, but he didn't work at the Daily News. I said, that's incredible. Tranos and I became very close.
Yes.
And before he died, he came to see me. I was in the Daily News, and we talked about the times in the Daily News. And I asked him that question. I said, look, I always thought that we were, a reporter. He said, no, I wasn't a reporter.
Yeah.
Another guy who did the same thing is Henry Amadziripi.
Yes.
Well, Henry Amadziripi was there all the time, and we talked and talked. And I thought he was a reporter as well. Until we met in Zambia, I said, but did you leave journalism? He said, no, I was never a journalist. I said, you were not a journalist? Why were you always there? He said, all of us were at the Daily News because they felt the Daily News was part of the struggle. you know. And it was part of the struggle. I mean, when the ANC was formed, the lead story was the ANC formation in the Daily News.
Yes.
And throughout the period of the Daily News, the struggle of the ANC, the NDP, ZAPU, and so on, all these stories were covered intensively. And, you know, there was a time when if they wanted something, they were going somewhere, they would say, can you send us a reporter? Either Shamaila or Wambe or Msaro would say, okay, we'll send so-and-so. And they would say, we'll be sent there to cover the... So in fact, I think for most of us, during that period, reporting was reporting on the struggle,
Yes.
basically, you know. But of course, I think there came a time when I think the editors realized that we had to be balanced, you know. And Shamarila was very keen on this. What happened was that in '58, when they were in his election, Dominion Party, which, as you know, became the Rhodesia Front,
Yes.
was contesting that election against the United Rhodesia Party of Garfield Todd, and also against the United Federal Party of Sir Edgar Whitehead, you know, who were trying to displace Garfield Todd because of his liberal policies.
Yes.
So, another Shamara who was editor then said, we will cover Garfield Todd,
Yes.
you know. The Michelle was on leave, so I was assigned to cover Garfield Todd. And I was even given the Michelle's motorcycle. I had no license, but there I was on the motorcycle. I fell down twice in that motorcycle. Fortunately, I didn't injure myself, but I covered Garfield Todd's meetings in Harare throughout that campaign period, you know. And you can imagine, we didn't vote, Africans didn't vote, so we didn't attend meetings. It was only whites, and I was there amongst these whites, covering Garfield Todd. I liked it, you know, because it gave me an insight into what exactly was going on, you know. Todd,
Sir Garfield Todd was seen as someone who was representing
Africans, he was liberal, and they thought that they shouldn't have him, you know. I mean, Edgar Whitehead was quite clear about that. He said, no, you put Garfield Todd there and you're going to have Ghana. The example was Ghana, you see.
Yes, which had
Which
become
had been independent in 57, yeah.
That's right.
So the whites were riled, really riled. But one of them, the Dominion Party, came to Shamaria and said, look, I see you're covering Garfield Todd, but why are you not covering us? To cover the Dominion Party. Imagine, these are the racist. And Shamaria came to me and said, you must cover the Dominion Party. I said, are you sure I can go? I'll come out of there alive?
That's right.
He said, no, we must. And he said, I promised him I'll do that. I said, okay. So I went there on my motorcycle. It was in Hatfield somewhere. I was there. I was the only black person there.
Yes.
And, you know, I was shivering. I thought, oh, these whites watching me. And I did my work, went away. I said to Shamera, when I covered it, I wrote something. I don't know if it was published. But you see, Shamera was keen for us not to be seen as being biased.
Yes.
And I think maybe he made the point.
That he was.
Yeah. He made the point that, you know, the African Daily News, in spite of its purpose of promoting African independence, was covering these racists. You know.
Yes.
Exactly, you know.
Yes.
So that one, I learned my lesson there, you know, because it meant that when I was assigned to cover the, what was called African Affairs, I was interviewing Colonel George Hartley. Now, George Hartley was the administrator. It was first called the Native Administration Office,
Yes.
which was in Market Square. Then, of course, after a certain thing, it became the African Affairs Department.
That's right.
I went to interview, this, first of all, Colonel Hartley. My God, that man was terrible, really terrible. He made you sit there and he made you feel small, you know. And he said, what do you want? Well, I think what we have to accept is that this was a racist country, no question about that.
Yes.
And there was no pretense, absolutely no pretense whatsoever. The Daily News was the first one to call Africans Mr. Because in the Herald, in the Chronicle, they were not called Mr. The typical example of how we were covered, you know, was if an African was knocked down in a road accident,
Yes.
and he even died.
Yes.
You know, the story would say in the Herald and the Chronicle, it would say that Mr. So-and-so knocked down a native, and they would call him just John, or Horace or whatever.
That's right.
And most of it was about how Mr. Horace felt about this and so on. The only mention of the African is his first name, and it's just, he might be called even a native. They used to call us natives, you know, before they changed to Africans. It was basically the Herald. The Herald was terrible.
The Herald then
was terrible. I mean,
yes.
I started reading the Herald, of course, you know, from school. You know, my stepfather was in the government, and they used to give them free copies of the Herald, and I used to read the paper at home. Of course, most of the stories in the Herald were about foreign. You know, the Suez Canal. I got to know about the Suez Canal because the Herald had a lead story every day about the Suez Canal. You couldn't find a word about Africans in there. Not a one word, except if we were knocked down by a car or were being sentenced to some, you know, robbery, something or something. But they did the deliberate effort to leave out Africans, and I think this strengthened the edge of the Africans to fight, because they were despised, you know, in a way that you. I mean, we were lucky because when I grew up, I could walk along First Street.
Yes.
But my mother says you couldn't walk along First Street during her time when she was young. They said they would tell you, get off the stoop. You know, they didn't want you to be on the pavement. And that's why there was a fight, you see, because people said, how can they do this in our own country? How can they do this to us
That's right.
in our own country, see? And I tell you, I grew up in the old bricks.
Yes.
The old bricks was, you know, your ghetto, real ghetto. And people were arrested if they found a man, because you see, the old bricks was built for bachelors only.
That's right.
Because all the men were supposed to keep their wives in the village.
Yes.
They shouldn't, if they brought them into the town and they were found, the house was locked up and the woman was arrested. And around the old bricks itself was dominated by this man called Stoddard. I saw Stoddard. Stoddard was the superintendent of the township. He was a frightening man.
And Stoddard Hall is actually named after
Named after him, and I've said to myself, this is, you know, generosity of the best kind. Naming this Stoddard Hall after this man was a racist. And who treated Africans in old bricks as if they were chaff. He used the policemen, you know, who were called, because they were called Katsekera. You know, Katsekera is a word which is in Nyanja. He says Katsekera is the one who locks up houses.
Yes.
You see? And he was called Katsekera.
And he was then the superintendent.
Superintendent, yes. And what they did was, as I say, if they found you with a woman, the house was locked up and they were told to get out and to give it to somebody else. You see? That's why they were called Katsekera. But it was crowded. Not as crowded as it is now, but it was crowded then, because, you know, in the middle of the house they built these tanks. You have seen them, the huts, built like huts. Those were intended for migrant workers, mostly from Mozambique and so on. And you had to have, you know, your certificate, because if you didn't, they would just kick you out. You had to have your stupa all the time. And in fact, at one time, you needed a town pass to come into Salisbury, you know, from the townships. If you wanted to come into, you had to have a town pass to come to work.
Yes.
You had to be given a town pass that allowed you to come into town to work. If you didn't, you were barred. Oh, I had to write that book because, you see, I think basically the struggle itself started in the old bricks. Because in fact, the first meetings of the ANC were held in the old bricks, you know, where people knew what was being done to them.
Was the conditions were terrible?
Absolutely.
Yes.
Absolutely, they were terrible. I mean, you didn't have toilets there. You know, the most civilized thing they did was to build communal bathrooms.
Yes.
You know. And you went there, and if it was crowded, you couldn't use it. And even to bath, if it was crowded, you couldn't use it. But that's what they had in the middle of the township, where the bathroom, the big thing.
Yes.
And you would walk in there, and you sometimes would find 5 men bathing, and you know, with there was no calories, no privacy at all.
Yes.
Just bathing there.
And
I think myself that this is what fueled people's anger.
to strengthen their resolve.
They said, how can we be treated like this? You know?
Yes.
Of course, the whites tried. They tried. You know, I'm talking about Colonel Hartley. Colonel Hartley was replaced by a man called Briggs.
Yes.
Another white man, but he wasn't as bad as Colonel Hartley.
That's right.
even when I interviewed him, I felt more comfortable. You know, I could talk to him and we could laugh. And that's when it occurred to me that in fact they were not all like Queen Hartley.
That's right.
You know, that they could be, you know. It changed my mind about racism, really. I mean, I knew that we were in for a tough time.
Yes.
But I think I accepted that they were not all the same. They were not all going to be like
That's right. Within this white racist system, there were some whites who...
Exactly.
That's
you know,
right. Yeah.
Because if you look at Todd was, you know, I mean, he was accused of loving African women and so on. You know, that was the criticism that was made of him. You see.
But he was a missionary, wasn't he?
He was a missionary, yeah.
Yes.
You know, he came from Dada, and
That's right.
and
Of
he was
New Zealand origin, I think.
New Zealand, yeah.
That's right, yes.
He was, you know, when he talked, you know, I attended these meetings, you know, when he talked of emancipation, African emancipation. He talked of bringing African into the government.
But short of majority rule.
Sort of majority rule.
That's right, short of majority rule.
Although, I mean, that would have been wild.
That's right.
Absolutely wild, you see. But what they didn't like about what he was saying was that the Africans would have a say in how the country was being run. And they said, what?
Yeah.
I mean, you could imagine the typical racist says, my domestic worker, my
boy, yes.
coming to...
That's why the boy skies.
Yeah, boy, and that's what Todd was defeated.
Yeah.
He was defeated, he was knocked down. And of course, the reaction of the Africans was to stage demonstrations of all kinds.
That's right.
And in '59, there was a state of emergency. It was the result of the ANC organizing some demonstrations, you know, against because what they were saying was that you think that we have a chance of getting into this government, we'll show you we have no chance whatsoever.
Yes.
Kick out Todd. And go out and became the, and in 1959 there was a state of emergency. The ANC was banned.
But then, that time, African nationalism was well and truly underway.
Oh, it was fantastic. I mean,
Yes.
we enjoyed it. The reporters, we enjoyed it because at the meetings, you know, what they said, you know, I remember, we didn't know the word Nunza Tunza, the George Jandor made it up. At a rally in Mbale, he said, Tatini Nunza Tunza. And we said, what word is that, Nunza Tunza?
That's right.
Spelled it. And he told us what it meant. You see.
Yes.
And of course, they said sellout. Sellout became a word which you didn't say. You know,
These were true nationalists.
Absolutely. You know.
But how did you leave the African Daily News in 1961? You resigned?
I resigned, yes. I resigned. There was a difference. You know, first of all, the pay.
Yes.
Pay was, you know, I was young. Yes, I was young. But an example of how I was treated, you see, I was working, the editorial was upstairs. The works were downstairs. So to go up the editorial, walk up. And I was walking up one day, and who do I meet? The managing director. It was Mr. Paver. I don't know if you met the name.
Yes, Mr. Paver, yes. He's actually the founder of
yes, he and his
African
brother
Daily News.
BG. Yeah.
That's right, yes.
Yeah. So I met him on the steps, and he said, "Oh, William, how is it going?" I said, "Oh, it's going very well." And he said to me, "The piece that you did in the parade was very good." I was then etiquette of the African parade. And he said it was a very good piece. I said, "Which one?" He mentioned it. I said, "Oh, I see, yeah." And he said, "By the way, how much are you getting?" And I said, £22 and 10 shillings. And he said, "From today you're getting £30.
Yes.
I was given an increment on the steps by the MD himself.
Yes.
And he just went to tell Shamali and
Because he enjoyed the piece.
Yes. You know, and they told him that from now onwards he's getting £30. I was on cloud 9. I thought, my God, £30 at that time.
Yeah.
£30.
A lot of money.
I qualified as a voter
Yeah.
because there was a preferential voter's role, you see,
Yes.
which you said an African must earn so much to become a voter.
That's right.
And I qualified for that, you see. And that was Mr. Paver. Again, that influenced my attitude towards white people. I thought, but I mean, the other guys, honestly, they would never have said to me, but they never did that. And I said, that's something.
Yes.
So, you know, I became etiquette of African parade, and then at one time I became editor of the letters to the editor of the Daily News, you know, because what they said, in spite of everything else, I mean, okay, I was mischievous, I was very mischievous. There were things that I did which they said, you can't do that, and so on. I was young. I started this thing at 20. 22, I was editor of the African Parade.
You were very, very young.
I was very young, and but they took advantage of my youth and said, how can you want more money? I mean, they themselves were, 35 pounds.
So what happened? You resigned?
I resigned. I went to China and said, I'm quitting.
Why did you resign?
Because Bishop Miller were having a talk, and he said, I think I had done something, and I was not dressed properly. He was very keen on dressing. That man was, about dressing, he was so fastidious.
Yes.
One day I came without a tie.
He was an English gentleman.
Absolutely. I didn't have a tie, and I had only a shirt. I didn't have, and he said, how can you come?
That's right.
He scolded me for that. I said, I mean, on the pay that I'm getting, do you think I'll be able to buy it? And he said, no. I resigned. I said, fuck it, I'll leave it. And I left in a huff, but I didn't realize, of course, that I was doing myself a lot of harm.
Yes.
I thought it'd be easy to get a job. I mean, there was no other newspaper.
That's right.
Except for the Herald.
Yes,
and then there was Evening Standard, you see. Have you heard of the Evening Standard?
That's right, yes.
Yeah. Now, when I left the Herald, I thought to myself, I've got 4 years' experience.
When you left the African Daily
The
News?
African Daily News,
Yes.
I'm sure that they can feed me there. There were no Africans working there at all.
Yes.
So I went there and saw the editor called Riz Meyer. I said to him, I want a job as a reporter. And he said, what experience do you have? I said, I worked on the African Daily News for 4 years and so editor, blah, 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 blah. And he said, we are not ready to employ. I mean, he was quite frank. He said, no, we're not ready to, I left and I said, my God, this is hopeless. So I left there and looked for another job. I got a job as Mabaran.
Yes.
I mean, I could write English, so I was a good Mabaran.
Yes. Clerical.
And also I was given to dictate, to write, letters. I was very good at that because they trusted me. I could write English, but of course it didn't last long, because one of the people who I worked with, Kelvin Mulenga, I don't know if you've heard of the name.
That's right. I mean, he's Zambian, yeah.
Right. And he invited me to go to Lusaka and work for him. That's when I left.
Yes.
Left here in '63. And I think that Kelvin, in his own way, really changed my life, because when I got there, who do I find? Vincent Mijoni, Timothy Nyaunji, and who else? Dennis Liwewe. All these people had been at African newspapers. And they were working for Kelvin, and he had invited them there. So on the paper called the Central African Mail, there was a dominance of Zimbabweans.
Yes.
You see? I mean, there was a time when we spoke Shona and people said, do you think you're back home or what?
That's right.
But I think they too helped us, because opportunities were opened for us, because we were more experienced.
Yes.
And we could write better. There's no doubt about
because
that.
of our education system.
Exactly.
In the then Rhodesia,
Yeah.
Southern Rhodesia.
And then the paper was done, professionally. It was very good. Of course, there was a white man in charge, Richard Ho, who was the editor.
That's right. Again, I think another liberal
Yeah,
journalist.
very liberal sort of.
That's right.
He was he worked for the Observer and so on. So with that combination, the Central African Mail was a great paper. And it campaigned for independent, end of federation and so on. You see. And I had a great time there, very great time. I started writing a column called Lusaka After Dark.
Yes.
Here I had written a column called Bits and Pieces from Harare.
Yes.
In the African Parade, you see.
Yes.
Now Tim Nyaunji, who had read Bits and Pieces from Harare, when we got to Lusaka, he said, look, why don't you start something like you had in Harare? Like I said, look, I knew Harare because I grew up there, but Lusaka, I don't know anything about Lusaka.
The Bits and Pieces column in Harare, this was light-hearted stuff.
Absolutely.
What sort of issues were you tackling?
Social issues. And,
issues.
And a bit of the of what you might call the repression that was going on. You couldn't avoid that. Because at every corner, you could see Africans being treated as if they didn't matter. And it touched you. And I was young and I was impetuous, and always I would, say things like what the whites did and so on. We used to call them Europeans then, by the way.
That's right, yes.
You were never called whites.
This was a popular column in African Daily News.
Yes. No, it was in Parade.
African Parade.
Right. Yeah. And I didn't know it was so popular until Tim said, look, people enjoyed that and you can write something. I said, okay. So I started writing Lusaka after dark in Lusaka.
This was in Central
African Mail. Yeah. You see?
And what sort of issues were you tackling? Again, social issues?
Social issues, but you see, because of federation and my politicization, politics crept in. You see? I couldn't avoid that.
Yes.
But I think Kelvin himself wrote a column called Kelvin Calling,
yes,
which was strictly political. You see? So the idea was that I would tackle the lighter issues. Yes, I worked for, in fact, one more newspaper. After the Central African Mail was taken over by the government. You see, the government took over the Central African Mail.
That's right.
And Kelvin became the editor after Richard Hall, who had been the editor,
that's right,
was forced out. You see, I mean, what happened there was really quite significant. You see, the paper was funded by David Astor, who was one of the Observer in London. It was because he thought he could help the struggle in Northern Rhodesia by supporting a newspaper which was, on the side of the Africans. The South African Mail was pro-Kaunda, it was anti-federation, it was a paper that really went all out against federation. At one time, Richard Hall wrote an editorial, which I'll never forget, where he says, the constitution of Northern Rhodesia stinks. It's like a pit latrine, he said. It's like a pit latrine. The digger you dig, the more it stinks. I'll never forget that. But you see, I think we succeeded because federation was broken up.
That's right.
And Northern Rhodesia became Zambia. And I think it was a victory for all of us who were struggling to end that.
So then you moved on to
the Times of Zambia. The Times of Zambia.
Times of Zambia.
Yeah. And now my move to there was quite interesting. When I was fired from the Daily Mail, because they employed a new editor. Kelvin was, he left because they said, we can't help him because he's following the footsteps of Dick Hall. Because Dick Hall's idea was that in spite of independence, the newspaper should continue to be critical. It won't just be, everything is okay because it's now under Kaunda's government.
That's right.
No? He criticized. Kaunda didn't like that.
Well, journalism.
Exactly. And that's what we were told by Richard Hall and everybody else. They said, don't think that because it's now an African government, we shut up and say everything is beautiful. No, we didn't.
So you moved to the Times of Zambia?
The Times of Zambia, where I started the Livingstone Bureau. I was the chief reporter of the Livingstone Bureau.
Yes, for the Times of Zambia.
For the Times of Zambia.
That's right.
It was an exciting time as well. And, Livingstone is near Zimbabwe, it's in Victoria Falls. So there was a bit of...
it was a government-owned newspaper, the Times of Zambia.
It became the government-owned newspaper. Although, this government ownership was not very, very clearly spelled out. I mean, Lolo owned it. Tiny Roland. He owned the paper. You see, he funded the paper anyway. It was his paper. He owned Times newspapers. But what we didn't know was that Kaunda and Roland had come to an agreement. But he would finance the paper, but Kaunda would decide who would become editor, who would become, and what the thrust of the paper ought to be.
At one point, you were actually fired by President Kaunda.
Yes.
Tell us what is
one of the reasons is that, you see, that I didn't know that there was an agreement between Tiny Roland and... I went there, after a Livingstone Bureau of job, I was promoted because I think because maybe I'd done a good job. I became news editor
of the Times of Zambia.
Of the Times of Zambia. Became news editor. And I moved to Lusaka from Livingstone. This was a period during which the struggle was hotting up. The fighting was going on.
The independence struggle in this country.
In this country,
That's right, yes.
And Kaunda, as you know, was deeply involved.
Yes.
Deeply involved. And he had helped to set up the ZANU offices, the ZAPO office, the office of the MPLA, the ANC, all the movements were there. You see? So he committed himself, to that.
So what happened?
What happened there was that there was a meeting which was going to be held by Kaunda in Lusaka. He was going to call Joshua Nkomo, Robert Mugabe, and Ndabandingi Story from here.
Yes.
They were all in prison here.
Yes.
But he arranged with Smith to have these people released
Yes.
so that they could go to Lusaka.
That was during the detente period.
That's right. Yes, during the detente
During
period.
the detente,
you see.
yes.
Yeah, yeah. Now, he held a press conference for the local press, and he said to us, I am doing this, but I don't want you to say anything about it.
Yes.
Because I think he felt it was too sensitive and so on. He said, don't mention anything about me calling Mugabe, Nkomo, and Ndabandingi Story to Lusaka to talk to Ian Smith.
And then, what was your role? I mean, what led to your dismissal?
Now, he said, I published a story disclosing how this had been done, which I did actually, because I knew the foreign minister was very Mwanga,
Yeah, that's right.
and he was a friend of mine.
Yeah.
So I said to him, what exactly is going on? He said, well, come here, I'll tell you what it is. So I flew down from Ndola to Lusaka, and we sat down with them, and he told me the whole story, who had been involved and so on, how Mark Chola, who had been the emissary, came to see Joshua Nkomo, and Joshua Nkomo said to him, you must be Mainza Chona's brother because of the mustache,
Yeah.
you know. And Venom said, this is what he said. I said, it's great stuff for a story. I put that in the story.
Yes.
And of course, they guessed who had done the story and why he had done the story and so on. And he didn't denounce me in name. He denounced me at a rally and said, I am going to fix this person.
This is President Kenneth Kaunda.
Yes.
That's right.
He announced he was going to fix this person.
He was livid.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yes.
But I knew what had happened, so I wrote to him a letter in which I explained
Yes.
why I had written the story, because I said, you had later on said to us, the journalists, now you can write the story. And that's why I wrote it. I wrote him that letter, it didn't get to him. Didn't get to him, and a few weeks later I was fired. I got this letter which said, I'm sorry, but you are not doing what you are supposed to do. And he said, as a party man, he called me a party man, you are not, and I thought, a party man?
Yes.
You know, so anyway, when I got the letter, I sent it to, I ring up the chairman of the company, Chairman Ronro, was Tom Tini. I rang him up and said, why is this man firing me? Because my idea was, he couldn't fire me, I didn't work for him.
That's right.
And I said, I don't work for him. And I said to him, why is he firing me? That is when I was told by Tom Tini that, no, he can't fire you because he has an arrangement with Time and Roman. I said, my God, why wasn't I told about that? Now, the letter which I had written, I told Tom Tina that I wrote this letter and Kaunda didn't see it. And Tina said, have you got a copy of the letter? I said, yes. I went to the office and brought out the letter. I said, here is the copy of the letter.
That's right.
And he said, I will take it to Kaunda. A few days later, he called me and said, look, Kaunda says he saw the letter, but he hadn't seen it the first time.
I see.
I said, okay, now that you've seen it, is he going to reinstate me?
Yes.
He said, no. I said, why? I'm unemployed. He said, because it would look unpresidential for him to fire you one day, reinstate you the next day.
Yes.
So I said, what are you going to do? He said, no, just hold on. You keep, we keep working, and we're not working at the same job, of course, but we'll take care of you, you know. And Tom Tini is a great man. He really stood by me.
Yes.
You know, and throughout the time that I was unemployed, he supported me.
That's very good.
And one day, he came to me and said, we're going to Lusaka. We drove in his car, big Mercedes-Benz, the two of us. We went to State House and said, the three of us, Kaunda, myself, and Tom Tina. And Kaunda said, Bill, I'm reinstating you, blah, 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 blah. I looked at Tom Tina, and Tom Tina just smiled. You know?
Very frustrating stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah.
He said, I'm reinstating you, but he said somebody else would be editor-in-chief, because the editor-in-chief who had been there before, to whom I was deputy, was being moved away or something.
Yeah, come to
The struggle itself was a great highlight, because you see, the Times of Zambia was best-selling paper there, and it carried stories of the struggle.
Yes.
And every statement by any of the leaders became a lead story there. You know? Because Kaunda wanted to succeed, obviously.
That's right.
Because he was under pressure. He was under pressure from his own people. They said, look, we're not getting much here, and you're spending too much time on this thing in Zimbabwe. And he said, well, I Otherwise, without Zimbabwe's independence, we won't be independent. We won't be exactly independent. He was good there. I think he was good there. And then all of us, the paper supported him. But after this incident, when I was fired and I came back, the pressure rose again. What this time, what the agitation was against the decline in standards living in Zambia.
Standards of journalism.
No, of living.
Of living, yes.
Yeah. And people were agitated, you see.
Yes.
Very agitated.
That's right.
And what I did, what you could say that was the straw that broke the camel's back, is I wrote an editorial in which I criticized the difference between the treatment of the poor man and the rich people and the influential people, you see. And one of them had apparently been accused, and this was a very fair accusation, he'd poached game in one of the game areas and had been let free. In the meantime, a domestic worker who had stolen a chicken had been jailed for 6 months. So I compared the two and said, this is a law for, one law for this and one law.
And that led to?
He denounced me like anything, He denounced me in public.
President Kaunda, once again.
He held a press conference
Yes.
in which I was the subject. And he read this editorial. And he said, why doesn't this man go back to his country?
Yes.
As soon as that happened, you see, I got in touch with Nathan Chamberlain.
Yes.
We spoke on the phone. And Nathan said, he said, we can fit you somewhere.
He was then the Minister of Information.
Yes.
Yes.
And he was quite happy. He said, we'll fit you somewhere.
That's right.
That's great. But then I thought maybe that might not be so easy. So I talked to the Herald people. I had met Capon and Robin Drew.
That's right. George Capon was then the managing director.
And Robin Drew was the editor. And we had met in London at the CPU conference.
That's right.
And when I wrote to them, they said, okay, it's okay, we can come. You see? I hadn't heard from Nathan. So I came
and joined
the Herald. Nathan sent his person to write me a letter to say, we understand you are at the Herald. Would you like to confirm that you are now at the Herald?
That's right.
I confirmed. I said, yes, I'm at the Herald. And that was the end of it. But of course, I knew that more was coming.
That's right.
Because following when you came to me and we were talking, he said, we are taking over. I said, when you say we, who do you mean? He said, ZANU-PF.
Again, how would you characterize your time with the Zim papers?
Well,
you were there from 1980 to
1990.
In various capacities.
It was a turbulent time, I can tell you.
Yes.
It was a very turbulent time. And I think it's because of my record.
Yes.
People were suspicious that I might do what I did in Zambia, get the president kicked out. Yeah. But of course, there were other, problems. If you take for instance, the formation of the features desk, I was in charge of what was called the group features and foreign editors.
That's right.
You see. They brought in Charles Chikerema and Malaka Malumusa.
Yes, that's right.
These were people appointed by Mshamayadira. You see?
Yes.
They came and they were supposed to be part of my team. They were impossible to deal with, absolutely impossible. I mean, Malaka had just come from the camps.
That's right.
What he wrote about, mostly about the war.
That's right, yes.
And of course, it came from Cuba.
That's right.
And he was full of socialism and so on.
Yes.
And the other writer was Mbeki.
That was the flavor of the time, yeah. Yes.
And of course, Mbeki was part of the ANC.
Yes.
He wrote about the ANC. He wrote about the struggle and so on.
Yeah.
And I kept saying, look, readers want to know something else about what's going on here, about food, about clothes, about the struggle in the keeping alive and so on.
Yes.
I mean, it's okay to write about the, what they call ideological,
That's right.
But at the same time, you're an ordinary person.
That's what life is all about.
They want to know what is being done about their lives and so on. So, what was done there, and I think this is very classical, there was pressure to remove me from there, but they couldn't do it openly. So they said, we are appointing an inquiry into the operations of the group features, and they asked everybody about their opinion, and most of them, I mean, it was a strange thing. They said, no, it's Saidi. Saidi is responsible. Saidi is not doing the job. And I heard this, I said to Elias, he was managing there, I said, look, isn't that strange? Not one person is saying anything good about me. They're all saying, you are responsible for everything that's going wrong. And Elias said, but what can I do? I said, okay, what are you going to fire me?
So he said, you were fired?
No, I wasn't fired. He said, no. He changed me. He said, you'll be doing something else.
Yes.
But that department was disbanded. You see? And I was left hanging in the air. So at one time I was the Zimbabwe's representative on the Polytechnic entrance. I was a chairman of the committee that interviewed the students to come into the Polytechnic, the mass communication thing. That was the sum of my job. And I said to myself, this is not good. I started writing my first novel in Zimbabwe, which I finished, which is called All Those Days. But I saw that the trouble basically was that the government didn't like most of what was being written about. What the government didn't like was to be criticized. I discovered that they didn't want to be criticized, and from my point of view, it meant that there was not much I could write.
So in other words, I mean, you believe in publish and be damned.
Absolutely, absolutely. I mean, I had a clash with Shamari. I wrote an editorial when I was acting editor of the Herald. One told me I was on leave. I wrote an editorial, which Shamari criticized in my presence, in front of me. He said, "We don't want things like that." And I said to myself, "What do they want?"
So that belief really it runs throughout.
Absolutely.
Your eventful journalistic career.
I don't believe that you appoint an editor and you tell him you are going to write this, or else you're out of a job. I mean, don't even begin to. I said to Shamera and the other, I said, there's no way you're going to tell me that as editor I have to ring up the minister and say, okay, minister, is this all right? Can I say this?
How journalists.
Well, I'll tell you what happened the first time. I left the Herald after 10 years.
Yes.
I resigned. I wasn't fired.
That's
I resigned and went to work with Elias at Mondas.
That's right.
Jeff came there. He was editor of the Financial Gazette and so on. We had a riotous time, a turbulent time with Elias.
Very, very interesting.
He rang me up and said, "You hate Mugabe." I said, "What do you mean you hate Mugabe?" He said, "Your column is always against Mugabe." I said, "What am I doing?
Yes.
This is the president and he can be criticized."
Precisely.
He is a politician.
Exactly.
He said, no.
It was a private newspaper.
Yeah.
Privately owned newspaper.
And I said to him, I said, "But why are you concerned about that?" He
Yes.
said, "No, they are telling me things. They are saying, how can you do this to us? We helped you." Elias came to me and said, Sabina Mugabe called him and said, "Iwe, takakubasira when your house was burnt during the election."
Yes.
And I said to him, that, "What's that going to do with me?"
Yes.
He said, "But you're giving me a bad name because there's no way you're going to say, Saidi, write good things because Elias is in trouble." Okay, how can I justify that?
What happened then?
Well, there was a clash. The final thing was, the Mugabe wedding, the marriage with
That's right.
Grace Maruku, you see.
Yes.
So, the story was quite clear. It was a controversial story. This affair before they got married, and Salim Mugabe knew about it, and what made Elias finally, decide that I was at fault was that Rupim Shakalala, she had a magazine called Woman Sambu.
Yes.
She had a survey of various women asking them what they felt about the marriage thing between and mostly critical. What I did was simply to lift that and say, this is the view of a group of women who spoke to.
Yeah.
And the lawyer said, no, we can't do that.
Were you saying?
Yes. I was fired from there.
By Elias.
By Elias, but you see.
From the Financial Gazette.
I was then editor of the Sunday Gazette.
The Sunday Gazette.
Yeah.
Part of the stable.
Yes, it was part of the stable.
That's right, yes.
Yeah. But you see, I put my foot down. I said, "You're not going to fire me." He said, "I can fire you."
Yes.
I said, I'll go to court." He said, "You can't win because Shamela hates you and you will lose.
That's right.
As soon as he said that, I said, I wish. I wrote Shamela a letter and I said, I understand from Nathan that if I went to court and contested, you would not support me because you hate me.
Yes.
He replied sometime later, he said, this is all right, that's not like that at all, you know. I got his letter in which he, well, doesn't apologize exactly, but he says, and he turns around and says, in fact, you know that yourself, but when we were in African newspapers, your problem was drink.
Yes. And then
But anyway, I was fired.
And then you went on to Horizon and then the...
I worked on Horizon
News
for
and,
3 years.
Standard?
That's right, yeah. I mean, throughout, of course, my idea was that I should be able to, especially the Horizon, I was able, and he was quite frank, you know. He said, look, well, I'm not you know, sort of obliged by anything to write anything particular about anybody.
Yes.
What is a story is a story for me.
That's right.
And I said, what about this column? I was writing a column called The Last Word,
Yes.
which I enjoyed tremendously writing because there were no restrictions whatsoever.
Yes, I recall that very vividly.
You know?
Yeah.
So, of course, what happened later, of course, was that the Daily News came on the scene.
That's right.
And Jeff Delta came to me and said, we are starting this thing, can you join us? I
That's
said,
right.
hey, it's a good idea. You know? But you see, initially he said I should be editor-in-chief. And I said, are you sure you want me to be editor-in-chief? I said, with my reputation, do you think you will last?
Yes.
He thought about it and said, okay, you'll be deputy editor-in-chief. I said, thanks. But of course, in the end, I wasn't even deputy editor-in-chief. Davidson became the deputy editor-in-chief. Yeah. But the Daily News, for me, was the height of my career. Working in terms of how we did it, how we caught hold of people's attention.
Yes.
You know, how we rose from 33,000 to 120,000 in circulation.
Yes.
In that short period, you know, I think it was a record of some sort.
Because obviously, I mean, the ZANU-PF government had become very unpopular.
Very unpopular, and they couldn't realize that.
That's right.
They didn't realize that. I mean, they refused to accept that they'd done things wrong.
That's right.
Which we tried to tell them time and time again.
Exposing the excesses
Exactly, you know.
of ZANU-PF.
And you know, during the referendum, we went out and asked people, what do you think of the referendum? People said, what is the referendum? We said to them, it's about the Constitution. People said, what is the Constitution? Can you imagine that? People said, what is the Constitution? And we said, people don't know what the Constitution is. And we are supposed to have one of the highest literacy rates in Africa. And you ask people on the street, you say, what do you know about the Constitution? They say, what is the Constitution? We said in editorial, we said, people should be told, first of all, what the Constitution is. Before you start asking them, we want you to contribute to the referendum. Because the referendum, it's meaningless to them. I went to the Standard, of course, and the thing followed me. I mean, the buggy, if you like, followed me. Because at the Standard, I mean, Davidson said, we want you to write a column. I said, fine, I'll write a column.
That's right.
And I wrote a column, Bill Saidi on Wednesday.
Yes.
That got me into trouble.
Yes.
You know.
With who?
With the government. You know.
But this was a privately owned newspaper.
I know. This is what amazes me. You see? I mean...
what were the consequences for that? Of that?
Well, there was a statement made by George Aramba who said, if these people don't want to go the way of the Daily News, they should get rid of Saidi.
Oh, yes?
Yes. I mean, it's written down. And I quoted it. I said, and they said to me, first of all, they said, we think we ought to retire.
The owners of...
yeah. I said, when you employed me...
this is Trevor and...
not Trevor, but Kumar.
Kumar.
Maybe sent by Trevor, I don't know.
Yeah, that's right, from Kumar, yeah.
But you see, but I said to him, why would you retire me? You knew how old I was when I joined.
That's right.
Kumar said to me, we didn't know. I said, you didn't know how old I was when I joined?
Yes.
I filled in all kinds of forms.
That's right.
With my birthday.
Yes.
He said, yeah, but we didn't know. So he said, we want you to retire. I said, okay. I asked Jameson, I said, look, what? And he said, well, you know, they've got it fixed. They want to get somebody else I said, but is it fair to tell me that I'm too old? Suddenly I'm too old? He said, well, that's. I thought it was a bit weak there. He could have fought by him. He could have fought him better.
That's right.
But he didn't. He didn't.
Yes.
Yeah. So, but what clinched it, I think, was that in the midst of all this, I was invited by Terence Ranger to go to London to address a meeting of the British Zimbabwe Society.
That's right.
To speak about the progress of the media in this country, starting from religion and so on.
That's right.
We should take ourselves seriously.
Yes.
Because to a certain extent, we are not taking ourselves seriously. People are not taking us seriously.
Yes.
That's why they can toss us around like that.
That's right.
But if we take ourselves seriously, people make a stand. You say, no, we're not accepting this.
Yes.
I've said, we're not non-entities. I don't think I'm a non-entity.
Not at all.
You know, a president fired me, not because I killed anyone, or I betrayed, I spied or anything, but because of what I had written.
That is the power of the media.
That is the power of the media. So we are not non-entities at all.
Precisely.
We are powerful.
Yes.
You know, we can be as powerful as politicians, except that our power is for the good.
Yes.
And it's for the public.
That's right.
And I think that our slogan should be, we are important.
Indeed.
We should be taken seriously.
Indeed.
You know, nobody should say, journalists are, well, you know, you can put them in your pocket and that's it. You see? Because honestly, when you look at it seriously, every country that is called a democracy has a powerful, independent media.
Yes.
And it keeps check on everything that is done on behalf of the people by the government.
Precisely.
Yeah. And we should have the same function.
Exactly.
We should be the people who say to the government, not in any arbitrary or obscene language, you say, no, that probably is not right.
But would you say, my brother Bill, that the general public in this country, do you think they have faith, trust and confidence in the Zimbabwean media across the board?
Well, no, I don't think so. And it's not because there's been failures on behalf of independent media. I think it's because the ability of the government to actually manipulate the media, not just the government media, but to manipulate even the independent media.
Yes.
You see? Because if you take my example, honestly, it's quite graphic. You know, I mean, I was fired ostensibly by somebody at Zimbabwe Union, but in real fact, I was fired on the orders of the government, because they said to them, if you don't want to go the way of the, and don't forget the Daily News was banned not because it didn't apply for the license in time or anything like that. No, it wasn't like that at all.
Yes.
Then it was banned because it became too powerful. That's all.
That's right.
That's all. That's not the question.
That is the bottom line.
That is the bottom line.
Yes.
And I think that as long as we don't take ourselves seriously and work to have our rights, because we have rights. We have rights as journalists. You know, as long as we don't do that, we will never be able to stand up and say to the government, don't mess around with us, we are important. Because we should say that to them.
But at the moment, I mean, we shy away from confronting.
We can't do that. We have people who say,
the government.
they say, no, that's too much. You know, they won't do that. But I look at my life and I say, I could have been killed, you know. I was knocked on the head in Zambia one time, you know. I was covering an election. And somebody said, who are you representing? I said, I'm a freelance. They said, where are you from? I said, I'm from Lusaka. I said, but where do you come from?
Yes.
I said, you mean where is? I said, I come from South Rhodesia. He said, for that they beat me up.
Go back to your country.
Yes, and I spent 5 days in the hospital unconscious, you know, only because I wanted to get information.
Yes.
That's all. That information would not have been harmful to anyone.
So the values really that we've cherished for a very, very long time are under threat.
Yes, you put it exactly the way it is. Those values are under threat. And it's up to us to fight for the restoration of all those values. And not to consider ourselves, well, we are only incidental. You know, we are not incidental to society. No, we are a major player. A major player. I always give the example, although some people don't think it's a good example, of Watergate.
Yes.
Watergate resulted in the resignation of the president of the most powerful nation in the world. That shows how powerful the media is, you know.
Yes.
I mean, it's not a joke, but Nixon, in the end, capitulated because Bob Woodward and Carl Bernstein exposed him.
Yes.
And he said, I've no alternative except to resign. That shows that journalists anyway are not non-entities. We're not non-entities at all. Living in the old bricks, growing up in the old bricks, was an experience, an unforgettable experience.
Yes.
The squalor, you know, the kind of deprivation that we suffered there,
Yes.
is something that had left its mark on me, you know. And I saw people. I saw the first sight of a dead body was near the Mkwisi River. You remember there was a strike in 1948 or 47. People said, "Kunemula akafo in the maize field near the Mkwisi." And I went there as a young kid, and we saw there was this dead man. And some people said he was killed by the strikers. I said, why would the strikers kill him? But there was a dead man there. And I saw this body. I mean, it scared the hell out of me.
So
That's something that really made me feel you can actually make a difference.
yes.
You must make a difference. And being a journalist, I decided that I would make a difference.
That's very good.
I would never write anything that people would say, oh, what is he talking about? What I want is to write some people say, my God, or hey, what the hell?
Yes.
Or somebody say, this makes me cry. I love that. If somebody says, I read it and I cried,
Yes.
I love that. The point is, I don't want to be somebody, when people read and say, so what? And I don't think many people have said that about anything I've written. I think you ought to be the kind of person who says, if I sit down to write, I'm writing for somebody whom I know will say, this thing was done with a lot of purpose. The person who sat down to write this wanted to really make a point. It just wasn't la-di-da, and that's what I believe in. I think we should all try to make a difference. I see myself as somebody who's going to die on the job. I'll die in harness, as it were, like an old horse dying in harness.
Yes.
Because I don't think there'll come a time when I'll say, I've given it up, I'm not writing anymore. No, I don't think so. I'll write. I've got 3 novels in the workings at the moment. And I hope to finish them. I really hope to finish them. I know that age might be a hindrance, but I'll try and you know, I've enjoyed my life. I know there have been pitfalls and so on, but I've enjoyed it. And I think that if I get to the end and say to myself, I fought the good fight,
Yes.
I'll be happy. I'm very happy if I can say I fought the good fight.